Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a good week, and today I wanted to give a short discussion of a book that I read a while back, almost a year ago actually, but I never reviewed here, and that still kind of is sticking around in my mind. That book is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Now, this book covers the very serious topic of sexual assault, so just be warned that it's not going to be for everyone, and maybe this review won't even be for everyone. Why am I limiting this video to a short discussion today? Well, as I mentioned in one recent video, I'd love to do a deep, in-depth discussion on every book I've read, but I really can only dive deep into so many, and I feel like it's still worth participating in the conversation on books like this where I never really get to fully flesh out all my ideas, but still want to voice what my impressions were. Preferably, I'd like to do such a discussion more like maybe a month after I've read the book as opposed to a year. But I'll do my best now to focus on what stood out and not ramble about things that I just don't really remember particularly well. And that said, this was a pretty well-received book, so hopefully you'll be able to find some other quality reviews that are better than my own, and I'd encourage you to check some of those out for a deeper dive. Know My Name is a memoir of a college-age or slightly above college-age woman's sexual assault by a student after a party on Stanford's campus. Chanel Miller, the victim, was not a student at Stanford at the time, but she had recently graduated from a different college, I believe. And although I definitely support the idea of innocent until proven guilty, I'm not going to say alleged here because the perpetrator, Brock Turner, was found guilty in a criminal court by the time this book was written. So as I said, Miller was not a student at Stanford herself at the time, but she attended the party, I guess with her sister and some friends. I don't recall which of them were the students exactly. So yeah, she was sexually assaulted at the party, and she accused Turner of rape. It went to a court case that took a while to play out, and in the end, Turner was found guilty, following, among other things, a very powerful victim statement by Miller herself. Of course, many spectators, as well as Miller, felt that Turner's 6-month sentence, one that was, I think, later halved for his good behavior, they said, was incredibly lenient and sent the wrong message about the danger and wrongness of such a crime. I enormously appreciated this book, and a big reason for that was its inherently personal quality. This isn't a book about the process of the trial itself or a deep investigation into the criminal justice system. This book is Miller's opportunity to tell her own part of the story and how this experience affected her. As such, the details of the legal proceedings themselves really only come into play as they relate to Miller's own experiences in the aftermath of the crime. And I appreciate for someone who's gone through such a painful emotional experience the extent to which Miller remains clearly aware in her own writing that this is a personal story. Her conveyance of intensely personal experiences while also retaining some broader perspective of things feels like something that we should hardly expect from a victim, but she pulls it off brilliantly. And I hope that doesn't sound patronizing because it's a little hard to convey exactly what I mean, but what I'm fundamentally trying to say is how impressed I am with this book as a work of personal writing, one that conveys the author's emotions and experiences without ever being so deeply engulfed in those emotions so as to forget how this is going to speak directly to her readers. She knows that this is her personal story and that there are other perspectives out there, so she just shouldn't try to tell it as the definitive truth of everything that happened and how the world should be. Instead, though, she focuses squarely on giving us a perspective that is so often left out of these stories. And because of this, her story contains enormous truth, both on a personal level and in what it reveals about the way other victims must feel and be perceived under societal scrutiny. And I think part of why this book was so popular and well received is also that it's not simply the story of a victim in a high-profile case who then decided to make a book out of her experience, which would have been worthwhile anyway, but Chanel Miller was already, before all this happened, an aspiring writer, and when you read this book, that's pretty clear. Now, I realize this all probably says something about how seriously these cases are taken and how victims' testimony is treated if someone has to be a professional writer and one writing with a perfect blend between personal emotional conveyance and objective reporting of facts at that to receive attention in the first place. And also part of a high-profile case at a prestigious university, which helps gain attention as well. All that is to say, though, that while this book is, in a way, a perfect storm of everything that you'd want from such a narrative, this can only mean it must be telling broader truths, personal stories that are hardly unique to Miller herself, even though it was her story that eventually gained so much traction. In fact, I think another part of what's impressive about this book is that it really is an effort, and a successful one at that, to reclaim a narrative in which She and other victims are often cast as these foolish and irresponsible young girls who should have known better than to get themselves into such situations and probably wanted what they got in the first place. Had she not come out and revealed her identity, that might be how the official on-the-record narrative of her case would have stayed, aside from her powerful victim statement that had made its rounds on the internet, I guess, already. In the criminal trial, much was made of the fact that she was heavily intoxicated at the time of the party, with some trying to connect the dots and conclude that she must have been trying to hook up with Turner or someone else in the first place. And she doesn't ever dispute that she was very drunk at the party. She argues that it was partially due to feeling uncomfortable at a party where she didn't really know a lot of people, and that she was just trying to have a fun time. But she challenges us to see that there are a lot of other ways to connect the dots, ones that might be more uncomfortable at first than just to say, oh, well, it's all a misunderstanding, it's no big deal, or seem less compatible with Turner's own narrative, but that also fit this situation and others like it much better. And in Miller's narrative, she comes across as anything but naive and foolish. On the contrary, she seems very emotionally and socially self-aware, at least certainly more than I am. So back to the fullest perspective on this book, I found it well worth reading. Given the subject, when I heard about it at first, I admit I wasn't sure whether I wanted to read a whole book about it because I just didn't expect it to be as effective as it was, which turned out to be a mistaken assumption on my part. It's a book that made me feel uncomfortable both in empathy with the narrator and with the broader challenges that society faces in making the world safer for sexual assault victims, or better for preventing sexual assault in the first place. And equally impressively, it didn't really ever make me feel uncomfortable in a sense of, well, the feeling that I agree with the narrator, but I believe she's unfairly attributing evil qualities to everyone, the perpetrator and the defense team and everyone. She manages to just perfectly thread this line where she says, look, maybe he's a great guy in other ways. Maybe he has a really promising career ahead of him. Maybe he's a great swimmer, etc., etc. But look, the fact is he did this to me, and it's not okay, no matter how good of a person otherwise or how bad of a person otherwise he is. And he needs to be accountable for that. Now, the book does get somewhat dark at times, as Miller recounts feelings of depression and aimlessness and just sadness that overtook her in the weeks, months, and even years afterwards, and yet the book never really feels utterly hopeless. And we also see that a lot of the trauma of this event set in not immediately after her assault, where it was just kind of hard to process, but rather gradually as she processed this and was forced to keep revisiting it over the weeks and months afterwards. And it's also worth mentioning that this book really brings home the extent to which the legal process really wears the victim down even further by forcing her to continually revisit the scene in her mind and reconvince herself and everyone else that it wasn't her own fault, that she shouldn't have simply done something differently to avoid it all in the first place. Like, one could hardly have blamed Miller if she'd chosen instead to just try to put this incident out of her mind and pretend like it didn't happen, but she instead took a path that hopefully in the end has provided more closure for her, even if complete closure is maybe kind of an inherent impossibility. I will mention that there's a small chunk of the book towards the end that kind of tries to draw connections between Miller's case and broader societal and political events going on at the same time, such as the Me Too movement and the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court hearings. I understand the importance of this section, but I didn't find it as effective as I think she might have hoped for it to be, and I think it might have been better left out, or I don't know, maybe just done differently. I don't remember it well enough to really say. I think for me it's just that everything else was so personal, and these feel a little bit more analytical and sociological. Nevertheless, the more impersonal attempts to draw broader connections are fairly short. They didn't detract too much from the overall experience for me, and honestly, I expect this is the kind of thing that some readers will actually be looking for here, so it may be just a matter of personal preference. In the end, though, this is a book that stuck with me well enough, in fact, that I'm able to recall at least this much of my impressions a year later without too much cross-referencing on Wikipedia or that kind of stuff. Let me know, though, what you thought if you read this book yourself. As I said, I think it's well worth reading and discussing, and I'm curious what impressions others have had. And don't even feel bad commenting if you vehemently disagree with something I've said, or if you just think I worded something in this review in a way that's not helpful or that reinforces some of the erroneous narratives we tend to form about such cases. Of course, I can't guarantee that I'll agree with you, but I might, and at the very least, I won't take any criticism personally. I think discussing this book is a valuable and important experience for all of us to learn more about this. So that's all I have for Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye and happy reading.